So I recently just beat... "2005's The Punisher" is exactly what you'd want it to be, with the game letting you play as Frank Castle, the Punisher himself, as you rip and tear your way through the crime-filled streets of New York before having to save the world with the Punisher's trademark ultraviolence and zero tolerance. The story is mostly a set of flashbacks told by Castle to Detectives Soap and Molly, as he regales to them his tale that goes from Castle simply taking down mafia members before he discovers a plot involving the Russian military, Japanese yakuza, and villains from his past. The narrative is fairly light, and while it is there, it basically just lifts elements from every bit of Punisher media from the past. It's mostly just there to connect you from one linear action set piece to the next, and give you a reason to slaughter as many goons as you can. In terms of the characters, while Castle is brooding and stoic, he still has a wicked sense of dark humor with his quips.
Your final command performance.
Soap and Molly try to play off each other, but their banter is fairly stilted.
Hey, it was like one of those Egyptian things, where they kill all the pharaoh's servants so they can serve him into the afterlife.
Just like that, Soap.
And most everyone else, whether it be hero cameo or villain, are there for only a minute or so, then vanish with no real lasting effect. Gameplay is fantastically fun and addicting. You get your hands on plenty of different weapons. While it is short-lived, even with upgrades, the slaughter mode is a carnage-filled spectacle where you're able to be invincible and recover some health while you tear apart everyone in your path, and I absolutely adored all the execution and interrogation scenes, even if they were a bit janky to play. And I also didn't like that the game surprisingly takes away some of your scored points for killing using the interrogation options. The gunplay feels incredibly arcadey, and this is one of the few games where I actually didn't mind the forced aim assist, as it actually helps the game out. The only weapons in Castle's arsenal I didn't care much for were the flamethrower and explosive weapons, but even then they had their really fun moments. Castle also has a set of insta-kill moves that basically makes you invincible for a moment while you shred apart enemies in arm's reach. You can also take human shields, which became really helpful later on when the game ramps up in difficulty. Throughout the game, you'll sometimes get optional objectives like saving hostages, looting armories, and other things you'll get from interrogating bad guys. The point system didn't really make much sense, because even if you do everything the game wants you to perfectly, I never got that many points, and while the upgrade system does add replay value, things got too expensive, and I had no interest in playing the challenge modes. Fighting enemies for the most part was really fun. The base baddies were shreddable cannon fodder, the armored enemies weren't too tough and usually offered fair challenge, but I must say, every single boss battle was just simply atrocious. Sure, it's cool to see Punisher and Daredevil villains show up, but they just aren't fun to fight. Especially the multi-part Bullseye battle, and don't get me started on how dreadful Jigsaw was to fight. Usually the game has enough style to make it feel like a Punisher comic, but there definitely is some aged crust here and there. But outside of that, I think the game overall looks pretty darn good, outside of being too dark visually in certain areas and cutscenes. Speaking of, I wanted there to be more pre-rendered cutscenes, as there are only a few in the game. Also a neat touch is when Castle changes outfits every few missions, although I will say his standard look is definitely my favorite. Also, while the game has plenty of blood, I really wish there was more dismemberment during combat than there was, and I'm also sad the game was censored in terms of the executions going grainy and black and white. The maps themselves fluctuated between alright to seriously, Stark Industries was just boring clean hallway after boring clean hallway, and replaying the pier level later on, just in reverse, wasn't needed. The level design wasn't perfect, but it more often did what it needed to than not, which was nice. Also, in terms of performance, the game runs fairly well and is playable, but things will really start to slow down when in heavy combat, or when you're in some of the later maps. And there are two moments where the game completely broke. Thankfully, one was fixable, and the other just crashed my game. Thankfully, checkpoints and save points are fairly abundant. In the audio department, the voice acting outside Thomas Jane as the Punisher, who I felt did an alright job with his gravelly lines.
My whole family died in a mob hit. I should have died too. I took enough bullets, but I lived. I finally figured out why.
Range from okay.
Bobby's wearing Kevlar under his suit. So it's gotta be a headshot.
What'll it be, buddy?
Hey, do you think Daredevil could take Sonny Corleone?
You dumbass lush. Daredevil is a comic book character.
Two just alright.
So, 70 plus bodies, lots of broken windows, and a building now fit only to be condemned. A tragedy of epic proportions, most would say. A pleasant evening at the office for you, though, right?
Then you're walking home patting yourself on the back for a job well done when some asshole tries to run you over.
But what really killed it was just how crusty and low quality the voice clips sounded, sadly.
Then you decided to crash Bobby's funeral. Most people crash parties. You crash funerals.
But I guess funerals are kind of like parties for you, right, Frank?
The guns had some good audio, and while nothing stood out, they did their job decently.
Guys, get in here!
The ambience to New York and such was alright.
No, please!
Shit! You killed him! Yeah, and you're next. Now where's the money?
I don't know. Only Bernie did. And you killed him!
And the soundtrack was fitting, just nothing amazing or all that memorable. It's exactly what you think a Punisher game would have.
Swim within this world. Oceans are all around us, but we know
With all that said, well, it's sadly not perfect. The Punisher delivers a fun, over-the-top power fantasy of an action game. The boss battles may be extremely frustrating and annoying, and not every gameplay element is ironed out as much as it should have been, but outside that, it really is a fun, addicting time, and this definitely deserves to be remembered as one of the generally good comic book games to have come out in the past. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I want to give a big thank you to the show's patrons, my friend Orion Knight for making the wonderful Art of Punish neat you see now, and in the thumbnail, as well as my friend Alex for touching up the thumbnail design, and Alexander for performing and doing up the show's intro song. My Patreon and their social media accounts will be in the description, and if you have any comments, questions, or recommendations, leave them down below as I read and reply to everything. This is Theodore Williamson signing off until the next video. See you guys!